opposing gloves here, and this is just going to be a short video on what is big room. We just need to standardize our definition. You may think big room is something else. That's totally cool. You probably know loads more of the history than I do. That's great. I just need to standardize it for these tutorials so that you understand like what kind of a sound I'm going for, I guess. So to my understanding, big room came from electro house and several branches of trance. So if you think of electro house, you know, it's got now the electro house I'm talking about is the kind that literally kind of sounds like electricity. Like the bass sounds are very repetitive and driving, like and they have like these big beefy basses that are just super driving. And I've heard tracks that have both elements pretty heavily in them. Well, I haven't said the second element yet, but it's got that element heavily in it, but it's got this other element that's called, well, I refer to as the big room element. That's like, think of like those big plucks that are like do 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 do, you know, like something like that, like some sort of a big pluck. And then also think of like the big chords where like this dun 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 dun, you know, those big huge detuned melodies that comes from old rave music and elements of trance as well. If you think back to like progressive trance and stuff, they've got elements like that in there as well. It's got minimalistic percussion. So like, you know, you have your kick drum and you have your clap maybe, and maybe some sort of an offbeat thing, like nothing too crazy. I tend to get a little more complicated with my top loops and stuff, as well as there's the reverb's a really important element in this, the way you use reverbs and delays and detuning, but it comes from those sorts of backgrounds. So electro also contributed hugely to the structure of the track. There's this stigma that, oh, big room sounds cookie cutter, and it's kind of true, but there are big room tracks that can sound unique. But if you go to like all the top hits, they're going to follow that formula. So they're all going to sound cookie cutter. Every time I see someone saying, oh, these all sound the same, da 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 da, and then it's like, well, you're listing all the very top ones, and generally if one thing got really popular and people emulate that popular thing, other things like that will also get popular. So it's like, I don't think that's a totally fair comparison, but you know, it's true to an extent. There's definitely a formula. You have your risers, you have your drops, you can have a false rise, and generally whatever lead you were building up at the first, it starts out as a pluck a lot of the time. Sometimes they start with a beat. There's just all these options you have available to yourself. And there's also, most new people start with this genre. This just because when people say EDM, or if you think of commercialized EDM, this is generally the genre people think of. Like if you go up to an older person and say, hey, I'm leaving that ambiguous on purpose, whatever you think is an older person is, you say, hey, what do you think of electronic music? Because they don't even know what EDM is. So they're like, oh, what do you think of electronic music? They immediately think of that music. Like this is the music they think of, which is pretty cool in my opinion. If you can make this well, then, and you can fit that stereotype and do it, then I feel like you have a lot of freedom to go in a lot of other newer directions. Because things that sort of happened afterwards were things like complextro. So instead of having it be like the same lead sound, because that's something that big room tends to have, we get a whole bunch of different lead sounds and basses, and we mix it up with a lot more heavy of an electro influence. And another thing that's really important here are the fills, the drum fills, and the Prada. I keep wanting to say the Prada because that's kind of how it looks like when you write it, but the Prada snare is a huge deal in this thing, like those big snare sounds. That's another big one. So anyways, that's my understanding of what big room is. If you want to correct me and say what you think, or if you want to mention some more influences or whatever, I'm totally down. Just when I'm looking at making something that sounds like big room, those are some of the things I'm thinking of when I make it. So we've got our definition standardized. It's no longer an issue. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.